Hey everyone, I'm Majiin and welcome in to World Tour Weekly, your one-stop shop for all competitive Flesh and Blood news. We've got some important news to go over with the Living Legend Battle Hardened in Orlando, the final Skirmish season results, and a bombshell ban and restricted announcement. Let's get into it. I want to start with the BNR because it's the most impactful of all of the news and it's going to shape the discussion for the rest of the video. Okay, let's start from the top. For the classic constructed format, Golden Tipple Red and Yellow is banned. This is obviously a ban targeting Gravy Bones, and the reasoning for it makes a lot of sense to me. The article mentions that Gravy Bones is a bit of an anomaly where the win rate is kind of average, but everyone agrees that the deck is too powerful. They go on to talk about how at the highest level of play, Gravy Bones is basically the best thing that you can be doing. A lot of the power from that comes wrapped up in how you get large stockpiles of gold basically for free. Sacrificing 3 or more gold at once is what really allows for these big broken turns. Choking down on the amount of golden tipples that the deck is allowed to play makes it really difficult for them to hit that threshold over and over. It's also stated that this might not be the end for Gravy adjustments and that they'll be keeping an eye on him moving forward. Marlin unfortunately suffers a small amount of splash damage in this ban, but the article mentions that she should be getting a small amount of support in Super Slam and more significant support further on. Alright, next ban, Bonds of Agony. It seems that LSS isn't content to leave Slippy as is, and I am so happy that this is the assassin card they decided to ban. With Slippy's inherent go again, Bonds is almost impossible to block correctly. Even if you could see your opponent's hand face up, oftentimes there are still no right options. Block too much and they just move on to the next chain link, stranding your defense. Block too little and it's really easy to activate Bonds with cards like Just the Nick and Flick Knives. Add Take Up to the Mantle to this equation and as the article points out, it starts to feel a little unfair. You simply have no correct options on many turn cycles against the current assassins. The article also states that while Slippy's win rate isn't past the problematic threshold, it's pretty close. So this ban pulls double duty, bringing the win rate a little bit more in line while also helping to mitigate the damned if you do, damned if you don't play experiences. Okay, next up, Germinate has been unbanned. For me, this feels like the right time to bring the card back. OTK Florian, or Runechant stacking Florian, was absolutely destroying the recent ProQuest season. At that time, a Germinate ban made a lot of sense, especially because Everbloom Life was going to allow him to play basically more copies of it. The deck fell off a cliff immediately after, and since the release of High Seas and the Necromancer class, the deck hasn't really been seen much since. Now, we have multiple decks that are able to keep a full defensive Florian more in check, like Gravy Bones and the Wizard Gang. So it seems like it might be a good time to bring back Florian's Marquee Majestic. The format is likely to get slower with the hits to Gravy Bones and Slippy, which is great news for decks like Guardians, Warriors, and even Florian. But it's really even better news for Verdance, who has always struggled against the Gravy deck and absolutely thrives against the slower ones. It makes sense that LSS would look to take a card from her as well, especially since her game plan into a lot of these slower decks is block, play potions, kill you in one turn with 4 rampants. So, Plume of Evergrowth is also banned in the classic constructed format. This brings both the ceiling and the floor of her HPOC combo plan down since you can't grab Rampant Growths from her graveyard anymore. This gives slower decks like Guardians a much better chance to interact with her and this game plan. Since she can't just grab another Rampant from the graveyard anymore, if you're able to stop her from utilizing a potion or a Rampant Growth, she might not have the damage to kill you. I know that I'm a well-known Verdance enjoyer, so you might expect me to be sad about this ban, but I actually really like it. The games where you would play the healing potion plan into other heroes just felt a little bit too binary. Either they somehow stop me or I played enough potions and they just die, which really removed the feeling of skill agency that we play Flesh and Blood for. This isn't even to mention that Plume would have been absolutely insane with Light Up the Leaves, since anytime your opponent got a little bit too low, you could just use Plume to grab it at instant speed. This makes a strong Storm Strider's kill just a little bit too easy to put together. I think this ban in combination with the Tipple bans will really open up some space in the meta for some of the slower decks. It could be that they still have too many rough matchups, but I wouldn't be surprised to see decks like Florian and Victor starting to do a lot better. And that brings us to our last change in Classic Constructed. Talk a Big Game is now banned. If you're like me, then you might not actually remember this card at all. Apparently in testing, they found that it might pair a little bit too well with cards in Super Slam, so they're banning it now to not have another Zephyr Needle situation. All in all, a lot is going to be changing in the Classic Constructed format. I will say that I'm very happy with how the bans were treated this time around. I'm feeling a lot more optimistic about the health of the format and tournaments as we move closer to Worlds. In Blitz, Talk a Big Game was banned for the same reason it's banned in Classic Constructed, so basically no changes there. But in Living Legend, Deadwood Dirge is now unrestricted. Chain got hit really hard in the last round of Living Legend Ban and kind of fell out of the top deck discussion. So now they're willing to let both him and Viserai play multiple copies of Dirge again. I feel like this is totally fine and will likely open up a lot more options for players in the Living Legend format moving forward. I've always been a Chain and a Viserai fan, so I was a little sad to see them kind of fall off the radar. This article ends with them saying that the next scheduled banned and restricted announcement is Monday, November 3rd, with the changes going into effect November 10th. This is only a few days before the World Championship kicks off. Okay, now with the BNR fully covered, let's take a step back and look at the skirmish results for this week's Metagame Minute. With Season 12 Skirmish officially in the books, let's see how the dust has settled on the Blitz metagame. When we look at the final week's results, we see that Arachne's Solitary Confinement picked up a solid amount of wins, beating out the rest of the top decks. Shifting over to the final standings, it seems that Florian just barely pulled ahead of KO to pick up the most wins of the season. Behind those two are Blaze, Arachne's Solitary Confinement, and Aurora, all more or less tied. I wasn't able to play the Blitz format this season, but it seems like a rather open metagame with a lot of viable heroes. Alright, now let's take a look at the Living Legend final standings. I mentioned a few times that I was eagerly awaiting these results to have a good jumping off point for my Worlds testing, and this does not disappoint. Judging from the number of wins alone, it appears that Briar is the undisputed top dog of the format, with Ira in a clear second place and then a smattering of heroes beneath them. It hurts my heart to see Icelander so low on the rankings, but she's still picking up a respectable amount of wins, so I can't complain too much. While this is how the metagame panned out over the last few weeks, don't forget that Deadwood Dirge was just unrestricted, so Chain and Viserai likely get a bump from that. Super Slam is also right around the corner, and I wouldn't be surprised if Starvo picks up a card or two from the set's release. Also, special shout out to the one person who won with Max the Hype Nitro. Moving over to Crack Shuffle play, we see a clear meta dominance from Valda with 119 total wins, giving her a 100% win rate. I hear she's so good in the format that not a single player has even tried a different hero. Jokes aside, this skirmish season seems to be another successful one with a bunch of viable options in both the constructed formats offered. Now that we got the meta covered, let's take a look at the Battle Hardened Orlando results in today's weekend winners. We only had one World Tour event over the last weekend, and it was a Living Legend Battle Hardened. If you remember, the last LL Battle Hardened was in Singapore, where Ira won in what was a surprise to many, or at least to me. Ira won once again, this time in the hands of Andrew Wilburn, proving that it wasn't a fluke and the deck is actually really strong in this format. There were also 2 Chains and 2 Starvos in the top 8, which is making me think that people may have written them off a little bit too much following their respective bans. Now with Dirge unrestricted, we might see Chain become a top deck again, but probably not as powerful as he was previously. Congratulations again to Andrew for taking down the event. Okay, with all that covered, let's look to the future to see what we have in store for us. Next week is a triple Battle Hardened weekend with Manila, Munich, and Chicago. All 3 of those events will have CC as the main format, but the ProQuest Plus on Sunday will be Living Legend for Manila and Chicago, and Blitz for Munich. The weekend after that is the much anticipated world premiere for Super Slam in Montreal. I'll be making the trip over, so if you see me, make sure to come up and say hi. That's all I got for this episode. Thank you so much for watching. I'm Majiin, and I'll see you next time on World Tour Weekly.